President Trump and former Vice President Joe Biden are turning the fate of the nation over to voters today. On the campaign trail yesterday, the candidates each made their pitch as to why the other is fundamentally unfit to lead the nation, especially during health and economic crises. And despite obstacles created by the coronavirus pandemic, Americans are voting in record numbers this election season, forcing many states to make changes to long-established voting procedures. For more on this, let's bring in CBS News political analyst Leslie Sanchez and CBS News political contributor and Democratic strategist Antjuan Seawright. Good to see you all. So, Antjuan, first to you.
Yes.
A number of states are still a toss-up, and there has been talk that some historically red states could flip blue this year. Where does the former vice president have a shot at doing that? Which states?
Well, you know, conventional wisdom, Vlad, would tell you that we should focus on geographics, but we're not living in conventional times, so you throw conventional wisdom out of the window. So I think it's going to be a combination of geographics as well as demographics. You know, we normally would say there are 6 states that will determine where this country will go after Election Day: Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Florida, North Carolina. I think all those things are still in play. However, I think you have to add some battleground places like Arizona and now Texas into the mix because of the demographic shift we've seen in this country. Also, the type of campaign and candidacy Vice President Biden has put on, not to mention who Donald Trump is and his record. And so I'm convinced that every state will be in play tonight. The key thing to look for, there are key constituencies I think we all have to look for. One, how big is the African-American turnout in the places Hillary Clinton did not do well, traditionally in the Rust Belt and North Carolina? We also have to look at the Latino vote in places like Florida, Arizona, and Texas, and then the white working class vote in the Rust Belt, Ohio, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. Add on to that young voters and white women, particularly suburban white women, and God knows what tonight may be, but I feel good about our chances considering the number of people who voted and what those demographics look like in those places.
So, Leslie, the president appears to have fewer pathways to gain those 270 electoral college votes. What states are you focused on? We know that he has to keep all the traditional Republican strongholds, but then there are other states that are must-wins for him as well.
Well, let's start with the basic one, right? Florida has been this series of too close to call elections for several campaign cycles now. And a lot of that happens in polarized environments. It happens in areas that I think Antjuan did a great job of talking about demographic change. So not only do you have large growing populations that are ethnically diverse, you have a tremendous amount of first-time voters. And that, Anne-Marie, changes the dynamic from traditional polling science. We kind of anticipate where to get it. When you have people that have never voted, whether they are first-time rural voters, sometimes they call them floating voters that come out because they feel the country's in trouble and they want to turn out. You saw some of that in 2016. Or first-time voters, which are in this case many ethnic minorities. We don't know how that's going to change in states like Florida, in states like Texas that should be traditionally red for about another generation are now very quickly turning purple. MJ Hager running for Senate there against John Cornyn. She ran, and I like to remind people, in Texas near Travis County. She won a county, a very red county, lost by only 3,000 votes, which is really unheard of and shook the Republican Party in Texas. So there's a lot of change. Arizona, Antjuan mentioned that, for the same reasons. More suburbanites, ethnic minority suburbanites, who are kind of moving there and changing the way they look at politics.
Antjuan, let me switch.
Hey, Vlad, can I say one thing?
Sure.
This is the first time I think we'll have races that will be down the ballot that may impact what happens at the top of the ballot. You look at a place like Iowa. Not only do they have races where you have a statewide U.S. Senate race, but also you have congressional races in Iowa and North Carolina and Georgia, where they also have a Senate race where Democrats lost those races in 2016, but they won in 2018. So that's going to drive out a record number of people splitting their ticket down the ballot. I think that will have a push and pull effect on the top of the ballot.
So let me ask you another question, Antjuan. This is about the results. The president has demanded to know the results of the election by tonight. There are also reports that the president could try to declare a victory before results are officially known, though he has denied those claims. Those threats still exist. You're very familiar with the DNC and the apparatus of the Democratic Party. What are you hearing about the number of lawyers that they have prepared to deal with some of the legal challenges that may happen over the course of the next 24, 48 hours?
We have the Army, we have the Navy, we have the Marines, and the Air Force on standby in terms of the lawyers that will be involved in watching over this election. Not just what happens post the election, but what goes on around the country, particularly in predominantly black and brown precincts. We've heard from this president and some of his allies rhetoric about voter intimidation. We know the voter suppression that exists in communities that look like mine. And so people on standby, I think we will probably take more caution than we ever have in my political lifetime about this idea of protecting the vote, protecting our democracy, because I think that's what it all boils down to. But also giving the American people, whether you're Democrat, Republican, whether you vote for this president or for the former vice president, the assurance that their elections are safe, their vote will be counted, and we're going to do this in a reasonable fashion. And as Leslie and I have talked both privately and in public, I think that the one thing all Americans should feel good about is casting their vote and knowing that it's going to be safe and it's going to be counted.
Leslie, as you already know, what we've seen thus far is a record number of early and mail-in ballots. And there's a Democratic analytics firm called Hawkfish that has predicted what they're calling a slight red mirage. Essentially, that President Trump may appear as if he's on track to cross that, to gain those 270 electoral votes, because most of the ballots that are going to be looked at initially are going to be the ballots that come in today, the people that are voting today. But then as mail-in ballots start to get counted, things could shift a little bit. Now I'm learning, states like Florida have already been counting their early ballots for the past few weeks. States like North Carolina say by the end of the night they should have 97% of their ballots counted. So I don't know how much of that will be a factor. But as you are watching the results come in, are you also going to be factoring in this idea that perhaps supporters of President Trump will vote today, but many, many others will have already voted and their ballots have yet to be counted?
I almost flipped that, Emery, a little bit. The biggest thing I'm personally watching is what we've seen traditionally, or kind of let's follow some voting norms we can have confidence in, and that has to do with the county reporting at the state level. You've talked about some states that we know historically they start counting early, they get their results a little bit earlier, and traditionally we can follow some of those. I'll give you an example. Kentucky. Kentucky it's a Republican stronghold, right? But it's an area that closes early, has already started counting the ballots. Republicans get between 60 and 62.5% in Kentucky. If you see a number below 60 in Kentucky, it's going to be a really hard night for Donald Trump. I mean, that's just a kind of like the canary in the coal mine moment. But there's also some other areas. Rural districts tend to report late. They report very late. So I expect to see Biden numbers strong in those urban areas. Wait until the rural red counties come in. And they're sometimes 3 in the morning. But those are the ones that drove the victories for Republicans across the board. And I expect to see that again. That's what we're watching for.
So let me follow up on that, Leslie. I know you love looking at the numbers. I saw some interesting research yesterday. I believe it was from Charles Cook, who, as you know, is very well known in understanding how polling and statistics work. And he was sort of suggesting something that I've wondered about too, which is that perhaps because of 2016, that some of the polls out there are actually underplaying the strength of Vice President Biden's lead in some states. Do you find that argument holds any water?
The biggest part of that, a lot of the national firms that did the polling in 2016, kind of in their review post-election, came back and said that their state data was not as accurate as it should have been. And a lot of that has to do, so let's just look at the swing states. That's really where the game is going to be played in here. And what a lot of people are saying is it's weighted based on kind of traditional norms and adjusting for 2016, and maybe white turnout is a bit higher. What we don't know is where ethnic and first-time voters are going to fall. Right, that changes that up. They've never answered a poll. They've never been on a roll. We don't know where they are. We don't know what they're going to do. On the Republican side, a lot of them have confidence that these are the people you see turning out for the first time to vote, those invisible or floating voters. Nixon talked about that, this silent majority. Who knows if that's really going to kind of play itself out? But you certainly have ethnic minorities, Latinos being the largest one in this election, the largest minority to vote. And I always say there's every 30 seconds there's a new Latino who turns 18 and is eligible to vote. Where does that play in? So what Cook is absolutely right. There's a kind of an alignment trying to reassess how to put the social science on that to make it more accurate. But the truth is, as technology has changed, as our demography has changed, and I think as social scientists have changed, we're realizing this is a whole new ballgame.
You know,
Antjuan,
Vlad,
yesterday,
here's what we know. No, you go ahead, Marie, I'm sorry.
Oh, I was curious about what we know, but I'm going to switch it up a little bit because I want to ask you about, all of these lawsuits. A federal judge denied a Republican bid to throw out roughly 127,000 votes cast at drive-through polling locations in Harris County, Texas. Even though that happened, and it's a Democratic stronghold, and it includes the city of Houston, even though that happened, they ended up whittling down the number of drive-through locations to just one. There have been hundreds of lawsuits over this election filed in dozens of states, and legal challenges are typically part of elections. Often candidates will challenge the other candidates' list of signatures they acquired, things like that. But it certainly seems like this time around, legal challenges are part of a campaign strategy. What do you make of the volume of legal obstacles being brought forward?
Well, it just reminds me that the effort to suppress and depress, in particular votes for people of color, seems to be on steroids this election cycle. Look, over 100 million people have cast their vote early. This is the first time in U.S. history you'll have 32 eligible Latino voters and 30 million African-American voters. I think people who are working extra hard to suppress those votes in particular know the numbers, and they see the browning of America happening before their eyes. They also know, traditionally, when these voters show up, they tend to vote Democratic, and big change happens in this country, i.e. we elected Barack Obama twice because these demographics showed up in a real way. And so what I make of that is that people are trying to keep these people home. From the very beginning, when we've gotten deeper into election season, we've seen the president really try to downplay the importance of voting by mail and cast doubt about it. We saw voter intimidation about showing up at certain precincts with law enforcement. And we see, whether it's felons having to pay a fine in order to get their voting rights back in Florida, voter purging in Georgia, in South Carolina, a witness requirement in North Carolina, black voters, ballots being rejected in margins like 3-1, the one drop-off location in Texas. We see this all over the country, in particular places where you will likely have high African-American or brown turnout. I think that is no accident. I think it's not by happy chance, and I also think there's a strategy behind it. But thank God the Democrats have been on the offense when it comes to trying to save our democracy and protect the right to vote.
So, Leslie, I want to ask you the same question. We should point out that both candidates say that they have lawyers at the ready once the polls close, but it's true that Republicans have really been the ones spearheading a lot of these legal challenges across the board, legal challenges that diminish the number of ballots that can be accounted for. So I want to ask you, you love this stuff. You love elections. What's your take on the use of the judicial system to limit the ballots that can be counted?
The question, Anne-Marie, I've always wondered, certainly nobody wants the ballots limited, but the question is, are these authentic ballots? Is there ballot stuffing? So there's not that long ago there was a history of stuffing ballot boxes, and it kind of it echoes a lot of that thinking. I'm not saying if it's right or wrong, but people want to be ensured that people on the rolls are eligible to vote, that it's not, that there's not some sort of fraud, and account for every legitimate ballot. That should be the consensus on both sides of the aisle. And so each of them in this highly polarized environment is looking at each other, with hypersensitivity, caution, and really a lot of doubt. And that's where we are. That's where we're starting. I don't think that's any different from how this entire election cycle has been. And I think if we feel that this is a fair, because they want to send it to the courts, you need an arbiter who is not biased, is what they're saying, that can really ensure that these are fair, these are not, to get the politics out of it. And for some reason, that gives people a sense of comfort. I'm not saying people want to run to the courts, but I'm saying this is the circumstance that has led to that right now.
Right, but so to the point, the specific question that Anne-Marie was asking about those ballots in Texas, where this really came down to an opportunity for people, because of the pandemic, to vote using this sort of drive-through service, right? That the county decided to afford citizens because people don't want to get sick. And the judge said, yeah, those votes should count. He wasn't happy with the fact that the structure, as it was named legally, wasn't really a structure, it was a tent. But that's not what we're talking about, right, Leslie? When you're saying that you want to make sure that people are voting legitimately, this is just something that was done to protect people from getting sick with COVID, and yet you saw a challenge to those 100,000 plus votes where you were essentially saying to people, we're going to disenfranchise you because you took a precaution to protect yourself and your family.
No, there's that. I remember, Governor Abbott in Texas, has challenged a lot of things related to Harris County. Would there be one drop box? And that went to court, and he lost that. And, I'm from Harris County and Fort Bend County. Certainly, so that's a massive, massive territory. And it's extreme. And you have people working, late night graveyard shifts. You have people that need these kind of services. The question is, is it a legitimate access? Is the integrity of the vote protected, and so that it's counted accurately? If they can move through that process and ensure that, it should absolutely be counted. And I think just throwing up these flares, suggesting that they're not, just for political purposes, whether they're on the right or the left, is completely not fair game.
Yeah. Yeah.
Leslie and Antjuan, always a pleasure talking to you guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.